Are we on? Okay. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This morning, we heard that there's more than 80 countries represented here at the World Seed Congress. And I think this really speaks to how this is an incredibly global system and a global value chain. Developing, breeding, and distributing seeds is a global process. And in order for it to work, the right conditions need to be in place, namely open trade and international cooperation. According to the OECD, 20% of calories consumed globally have crossed at least one border. So maintaining these global supply chains is essential to food and nutrition security. No country is entirely self-sufficient when it comes to producing all of the food that their population consumes. And that means that disruptions are inherently global too. And they're hitting on multiple fronts. Of course, we recently had the COVID-19 pandemic, there's war, and also a shifting patchwork of regulations between countries and even within them. And as we know, these disruptions can be really harmful for trade. I'm going to quote Dr. Kerry Fowler here. He just gave the keynote. He said this morning, "When we start to restrict trade, we restrict options. And in this time of climate change, these types of options are essential for survival of agriculture." So I'm really glad to be moderating this panel because it focuses on opportunity amid all the market turbulence that we're seeing. And from everybody that I've met so far at the Seed Congress, there's just this really inspiring willingness to work together and to try to overcome some of the challenges that the sector is experiencing. So today we're really going to try to understand the present, but focus more on the future. What does the future of the seed trade look like, given some of the trade regulations and restrictive policies that we're dealing with, and what does it all mean for food security? And how can technologies such as AI support more transparent and resilient seed markets? So we're going to be looking at solutions and market opportunities. I'm joined by this very distinguished panel here, and they come from all throughout the sector. We have here Philippe Sieber-Gasser. He's the founder and CEO of Besso. Seed companies navigate trade regulations and compliance using AI. We have David Malan, managing director of Klein Karoo seed production, which is based in South Africa, and he's also an ISF member. We have Doaa Abdel-Motaal, senior counselor in the Agriculture and Commodities Division of the World Trade Organization, and ÜSTÜN ECOSA, which is a regional trade association based here in Turkey. We're going to start with an address by Philippe that will kind of set the table for the regulatory and tariff environment that we're currently seeing, which will also include questions from our audience. So I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Tanya. And it was very interesting to follow before turbulent times they are indeed that we're living and that the seed industry is facing these days. We've also heard a lot of these days about the interconnected nature of the seed industry and the key role of trade in supply chains, as was just said, and also the heavy regulatory exposure. So in light of this, it's an absolute honor for me as an outsider that is creating a company that scales empirical legal research using AI to take an outsider's view into the seed industry and try and discuss a bit. So since I happen to miss, and my clicker doesn't yet work, how do we get it to work? Hooray, it's working now. Since I happened to miss last year's Congress in The Hague, it was for me very interesting to catch up through the recordings of the panels and to try and find out a bit what was the key topics that were preoccupying at that time a year ago, the people speaking about market use, some of the key words that came out around regulatory complexity, fragmentation, uncertainty, for a check-in, what's happened over the last year. So, well, we look at regulatory complexity and, well, yes, it's been a continuous topic for the seed industry very clearly since decades across many different domains, including SPS, customs, genome editing, etc. The regulatory fragmentation, we've seen it accelerate massively. I mean, we can hardly open a newspaper without reading tariffs in the first 5 seconds. Very much related to that, the uncertainty has continued to raise from peak to peak. There was a question mark last year, would food be weaponized? This time around, we've seen it being weaponized now. And there was an expectation mentioned last year that seed trade would grow approximately 2% in 2025, and based on the early figures actually going in reverse, because that do to an industry as international as seeds, on which the livelihoods depend all over the world. So let me look a little bit at the data, and because we are a tariff company, I will have a bit to present. What we have been doing is to look across 2 of the main rate categories, vegetable seed and flower seed, across the top 10 importing countries worldwide. How have things evolved on the tariff side of the last 30 years? And I won't go through every country individually, but you see the pattern pretty clearly. Rates have either been low, stayed low, or decreased over time. And you get to a global average that has come down from somewhere close to 4%, more towards 1.4% in 2024, essentially largely negligible tariffs. And the big question is, where are we going with this? We've seen one spectacular announcement on the beginning of April. We've seen that rolled back just a few days after, bringing us now to around 10%. Bringing the global average up well above 2%. Currently in 90-day suspensions, multiple of them, where we've got signals pretty clearly that it may increase further thereafter. So the question that I wanted to address is weaponized, and just to look at an example of 2018, I don't want to dwell on it too long. It's from the New York Times. It's just an illustrations of how trade wars can escalate once the tariffs are announced and other countries start to retaliate, and how food can also be caught into it. I'm sure you all recall 2018, when after a few initial tariffs being imposed tariffs on by the US, we saw reaction from China initially, very measured. We saw then the European Union joining with countermeasures that started to affect food. It's very small print. I don't know if you can see it, but essentially a lot of the responses were on food stuff. Same on the Canadian side. Also Mexico joined the retaliation measures, bringing approximately all to the same level, leading then the US administration to escalate things further, adding another 50 billion of goods to the tariff list, leading China to retaliate again, not sparing food, and so on. It continues then, and a lot of these measures have been kept in place until today. So I'm not here to sound alarmist. We've had that just before in the keynote. But I just wanted to make the point that we are facing a new normal in trade policy. And one thing that struck me was that a year ago, a lot of the discussions were still around, well, but what should policymakers do to make the environment more stable? And I think we have to acknowledge that we are in a day and age of regulatory fragmentation that is accelerating, where volatility and restrictiveness in regulations have come to compound the complexity that we've known for many decades, as we see here on this graph from the Global Trade Alert that classify all trade policy measures and as restrictive and liberalizing. And in that context, for me, the main question is, how do these opportunities? For instance, one of the topics that I wanted to bring in as a discussion impetus is, how can we avert the compound effect of potential tariff? Example of a 10%, and sorry, the formatting has been a little bit messed up here in the transfer of the slides, but I think you can see it, that if we have a typical seed value chain with goods crossing border 5 times before the seed is sown, assuming you have a 10% tariff on every border crossing, it cumulates and cost increase to the seed. If we go towards a world of 20% tariff, this jumps to 57%. In this context, we can ask ourselves, for instance, is it worth looking again at free trade agreements, which in the past have not really had a strong incentive to be used because the tariff rates were so low? But now, if we see the global averages going back up towards 4%, then suddenly it may become interesting to delve into this a bit deeper. And there are a number of other topics, such as how do we use AI in regulation, etc. Thank you. That was just a little discussion starter on my side. I hope it's helpful.
Thank you so much for that, Philippe. Certainly, tariffs are looming large in everyone's mind here, both as something that can potentially be harmful for global food security and for so many of the other aspects of the sector that have come here to the World Seed Congress. By turning to Ali and David, I thought I'd start with you. I was wondering if you could give us kind of the big picture. What is the current state of the seed market? And when it comes to some of the trade restrictions that we're seeing, what is foremost in your mind as presenting some of the biggest barriers today? And Ali, I thought perhaps you could talk about the region that you work primarily of ECOSA, and David, both as the head of a seed company and in your capacity as an ISF member.
Tanya, I hope
it's on. Okay.
I hope you gave me 4
Closer.
sentences about the ECOSA. ECOSA is about 20 years ago, by the decision of the presidents of the 10 countries in the region. These are Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and all those 10 countries are the members of this ECO, that is the Economic Cooperation headquarters is in Iran. And they decided to set up a seed association, and they gave the name ECOSA, and the headquarters is in Ankara, in Turkey. So when we look at these countries, for seed marketing, compared to Europe, it is far behind. I have to. There must be some regulations. For example, registration of the genotypes or registration of hybrids or varieties. That is not the same in every part. Only 2 of them, Turkey and Iran, is the OECD seed scheme member, and they have the ÜSTÜN accreditation. So all the others, they cannot sell the outside because they cannot produce ÜSTÜN certificate and OECD certificate. That is the case at the moment. And breeding perspective, Turkey has a developing breeding structure at the moment in the last 20 years, I would say. In the other countries, is done by the public services, and I don't know the efficiency, to be honest. So this is the case. And for the seed market, there isn't a very restriction, but only they need registration. But there is not a standard registration system. That is the case, and ECOSA is trying to set up this standard international registration system in the region.
Okay.
One of the main reasons this area is transportation cost is very much. Because if you consider the countries, most of them doesn't have a harbor. It makes the cost very much, because from Turkey to Uzbekistan, for example, it takes a truck. And when I sell the seeds from Turkey to Uzbekistan, almost I pay 40% transportation costs. So this is the one reason. That is the natural restriction, I would say. So, when it comes to the seed production, shortly, almost there is no seed production. I mean, in high volumes. Maybe there must be some serious, but when it comes to the cotton, corn, sunflower, and those or hybrid vegetables, that is not there. I would finish saying one word. In the region, the big question is quality or quantity. Unfortunately, when the farmers or seed business buy something, they look at the price. The price is the factor at the moment for making decisions, and it has to be changed in time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. David.
Yeah, if sorry, my voice is a little bit stronger than most. So the value of the total seed market, and we've had these discussions the last couple of days. If we talk about the value at farm gate, it's $90 billion. So it's a significant industry, but compared to, you know, food and things like this, it is not that significant. But all food will come from seed. So the value of the seed market impacts on food security, impacts on everything that goes downstream. Now, looking at the topic, you know, creating pathways to prosperity, and you talk about the whole value chain. You talk about from the time that the variety is developed, you talk into the market, you talk about the seed producer, you talk about the user of the seed, the guy that's going to produce the fresh market product that goes into the market. You talk about the food security that lies at the end of that. And that whole, if you talk about prosperity, pathways to prosperity, you need to take all of that into consideration. And they all need to benefit from this value that you add. Now, what are the main tendencies in the world, or what impacts on this? Of course, climate change. We're referring to climate change. And that is impacting on everything in that chain. From the point where the breeder develops a new variety that goes to a specific region, goes to a specific climate condition where that product is going to be produced to ultimately get the best yield out of that. So that impacts hugely. And then on top of that, you have the impact of climate change that will result in movement of diseases, movement of insects around the world. So, and that again impacts on the movement of the seed, because different diseases popping up around the world and different problems popping up will result in seed not being able to be moved because of phytosanitary arrangements. Then, you know, sort of like we have the tariff thing, how that is impacting. So just from a seed production perspective, and please remember I'm from that era or area, it is simple that if different tariffs is going to be imposed on different seed production regions, it impacts directly on the competitiveness of seed. What do we say? We say that essentially we want to give every farmer in the world the choice to have the best variety available for his region and also for his choice of variety. But if there is too many factors impacting on that, it means that he will be denied the choice of the right variety for his area. Now, you know, we've been listening to Philippe the last couple of days in terms of what AI can do. And, you know, sort of, Philippe, we've been talking about how we can use AI or a platform of AI to facilitate the movement of seed around the world, to find the quickest way of changes that occur in phytosanitary regulations in countries, because it changes all the time, and how we can improve our knowledge base to get the seed to the end user as quickly as possible. But I've also wondered, and we haven't had this discussion, but how can we also use AI to look around the world and to see which areas will, in different forums, we're also talking production. There's just so many seed production regions in the world where seed can be produced. Change. How will climate change in those areas, and how will seed production be impacted in those areas? Coming to AI, sort of like AI on these forums that we are talking now is the bigger forum, but of course also in our smaller world in seed production, I can see that AI is going to be the big game changer in terms of cleaning and value adding of seed. To use a small example, the first electronic sorting eye was released around 1980. And that was a game changer because suddenly you can sort and clean seed by using cameras with algorithms, and you could clean the seed better because you suddenly, with the AI platform, we can do 2D and 3D scanning of the seed. So sorting of seed using AI platforms, using seed production, using GIS, and also using satellite technology to see the crops better. So all of that is impacting. So yeah, for sure, AI, in my opinion, for old guys like me, it's a little bit scary. I have to admit, but of course, the reality of it is something that we have to embrace. And it is something, it's a tool that we have to employ in our industry. And for sure, going forward, I can see that AI will be the game changer in, sort of like the practical side of it, but also in the knowledge side of the industry.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Philippe, you didn't actually get to address AI very much in your presentation, so maybe we can just go to that and perhaps make it a little bit less scary for us. You work for an AI company, of course. What role can AI and digital tools play in improving trade logistics, transparency, and investment opportunities in the seed sector, and also kind of helping us navigate some of the uncertainty that we're seeing?
Thanks very much. Yeah, and it's fascinating these days, the discussion about AI. For us as an AI startup, we really notice how, to cite Gartner, AI is right now at the peak of the hype cycle. And it's very interesting because, and specifically I'm referring to generative AI, what we see today is that I would say the classical machine learning technologies have been around for a long time, like you were saying before, around pattern detection, error sorting. Those are things that have existed for decades, that have been super powered in the last few years with more computing power, with more data, but at the end of the day, they're the same algorithms that we have known for a long time. The ones that are really new are the ones that are coming from generative AI and the deep neural networks, which have opened all kind of new possibilities that we're still discovering. And there are so many use cases where we have to say, well, why should I use a shovel if I have an excavator? And it's obvious, it will, like a lot of people are saying, and that's also a Gartner quote, it's the new steam engine of our time. But you can't use a steam engine to change a light bulb. That's a bit the issue, and we still need to find out what are the light bulbs and what are the things that actually work specifically with Gen AI. I can say a little bit about the regulation space. On our side, what we see is that it is possible to use generative AI to actually correctly read and assess regulations. But you cannot do it by just putting a question into ChatGPT. It will very confidently give you a wrong answer, and it will repeat it and defend it if you challenge it. No, instead what you have to do is to really embed specialist knowledge of the sector into how AI is prompted and scale that in a very minutious way with an application that's specific to the industry. So they're actually extremely verticalized solutions, but that then end up actually adding value and giving that. But those are, I would, as an AI enthusiast, I would warn against seeing AI as the panacea. I think you will see very vertical and individual solutions specific use cases emerge.
That makes a lot of sense. Like any other technology, we have to learn how to use it and learn its application into our existing work. I was wondering if I could ask you a question, Doaa. The World Trade Organization, of course, has played a hugely important role in trade liberalization. You do so many different things. You help with everything from food safety to animal health regulations. You ensure that regulation is based in science and not just political agendas or commercial interests. When it comes to trade policies in these uncertain times, what is WTO doing to ensure that the seed sector can continue its work? And what is the role of the multilateral system in ensuring things, truck on despite all of the headwinds that we're facing?
Thank you very much for that question today, given the turmoil. Obviously, the world has just come out of the COVID crisis, and we moved from COVID to the Russia-Ukraine war, and from the Russia-Ukraine war to a war in the Middle East, and now to unstable trade policy. So clearly there's a lot of turmoil. So what is the role of the WTO and the role of international trade in food security? I would say the role is fundamental. International trade feeds 1 in every 6 people around the globe based on conservative estimates. And of course, trade in food starts with trade in seeds. And the other thing that very few people know, except this audience, of course, I'm speaking to the converted, is how global the seed industry is. So most people think that a seed is produced in one place and then sold. But of course, that's not at all what happens. The life cycle of a seed is very complicated. So seed will be produced in a laboratory somewhere and will then be exported to be sown into the ground for multiplication. Once it multiplies in a particular environment, it will then be re-exported to yet another destination for cleaning, coating, quality assurance, yet again to produce food with food to be sold on to other destinations. So the life cycle of a seed is huge. And as you can see from the exhibition right behind us here on the trading floor of this Congress, there are booths that are advertising sorting machines, booths that are advertising cleaning machines, booths that are advertising agricultural services. So trade in seeds not only depends on trade in the seed itself, but it also depends on trade in a whole lot of industrial products and services that make seed production possible. International trade is key in all of that because the WTO rulebook has an agricultural chapter, an industrial goods chapter, a services chapter, and of course, an intellectual property chapter. And a seed starts with an idea, hence the importance of intellectual property. It then moves across the globe through WTO rules on agriculture. The sorting machines, cleaning machines, and everything else that's on this exhibit floor move through the WTO rulebook on industrial goods. The agricultural services, transportation services, logistical services move through the WTO rulebook on services. So the role of WTO is to stabilize international trade in food, which is so global. There are some countries that could literally starve were international trade in food to come to a halt. So if you look at Gulf Arab countries, they import 80 to 90% of their food.
Okay.
If you're looking at a globe and you just shift it around, you move to Asia. Singapore imports 80% of its food. Move the globe around yet again. Move to Latin America, the world's biggest food exporting continent. Latin America, Haiti, a country like Haiti, imports around 40% of its food. So wherever you look, we are very interdependent, and the WTO is there to help us to where there's a deficit in food.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I think that just really, those figures that you just mentioned, it really speaks so much to the importance of open trade. I have a question for anyone on the stage, perhaps all of us. How can, given the current policy environment that we're in, how can trade policy evolve to support more open, innovative, and resilient seed markets? What are some of the things that you would like to see? And how can we think of this time of immense disruption as also a time for market opportunities?
Yeah, it's a loaded question. Not a simple answer to it, but of course, I think the main thing that we want to achieve is to ensure that seed will reach the right seed will reach the grower that require it. That is the essence of it. So how do we make sure that new varieties that are bred using new breeding techniques, new AI, etc., that it reaches the market to ensure that we will produce in that way enough food to supply the food world, or the world to the food to the world. So in my opinion, we're having a lot of these discussions about systems approach, multilateral agreements, finding ways to make the movement of seed easier. Because unlike what we would like to believe, the movement of seed is not getting easier. It's actually getting more difficult, more complicated, more requirements to move the seed from one place to the other, as Doaa has pointed out. And that is key. I think we have to find new systems in which to move the seed more successfully, more efficiently from one place to the other. And then we're also sitting with, a lot of practical issues, in terms of availability of vessels, ships, airlines, etc. So for me, it boils down to, finding ways of mitigating the risk of not getting the right seed produced in the right area, because it's also about the area in which you produce it. The area in which you produce it means that you will have very high quality seed that will go to somebody else, as Doaa has pointed out. And I think what we need to do is develop more systems and working more diligently on various systems that we already have to facilitate that movement of seed. And I think AI is exactly what we are talking about to get that right. Because, it's not getting easier to get the seed to the final destination, but the requirement is getting bigger because we have more varieties, we have more people, we have more companies, and the size of seed lots are getting complicating the movement of seed. So we need something else. And that game changer might very well be what Philippe is talking about.
I'm very thankful to David for bringing this up. And I was close to raising my hand before and adding almost the same answer, but from a very top-down perspective. If you think about trade regulation, I think what should policymakers do, or how could policy evolve? The answer is relatively simple, and it's in the SDGs. It's in SDG 17A. It's a coherent, consistent, multilateral global trading system with clear, predictable rules. That is what policymakers should do. The main issue is that it is not at all what is happening. We're rather going in the direct opposite direction. So for me, the question that I'm asking myself is it the right time, when we're going through so much geopolitical tension, to wait for or hope for the policymakers to go in the right direction? Or should we rather make lemonade when we're served lemons? And here, I think that's where we can try and use AI to the benefit to see, so how can we achieve true 360-degree applied regulatory insight in real time, so that I can continuously optimize my supply chain based on what is changing there in tariffs, and have that view instead of continuously doing these things manually, slowly, and expensively.
I really like what you said about, do we make lemons out of lemonade, or do we try to push policy regulations? Yeah, like which one do you do? And it's kind of like you have to do both, right? You have to try to do your best to run your business day to day, and then of course also think about the long term and to push for more open policies, open trade again. Doaa, did you want to add something?
Yes, I wanted to come to the question that you raised. And I think what we all need to work towards is to make the international trading system more reliable. Because when countries perceive the trading system in an area as sensitive as food to not be reliable, they begin to isolate themselves. And they isolate themselves through a series of measures that are essentially called today food nationalism or food sovereignty. They start putting in place export restrictions on the food that they send abroad. So they hoard their food for themselves. They keep it at home. Or they start to, fight each other imposed on food. So all sorts of measures to create a situation where your food is grown at home. And that's something that we really need to avoid, because where countries sit on a map is no more than an accident of geography. So we need to be there for each other. There are countries that can literally not make it without international trade in food. I come from Egypt, and the United Nations Development Program has told my country that if it wants food sovereignty, it needs 3 river Niles, not 1. We simply don't have enough water to be aiming for food sovereignty or food self-sufficiency. So how do we make the international trading system more reliable? We need to make sure that export restrictions are not used at random. There need to be very strict rules at cutting off the supply of food at the international level. And we have to make sure that we continue to open markets, reduce subsidies that create unfair competition, and reduce tariffs that create hurdles for food to travel across the globe. So really, there's nowhere to go other than the multilateral table, I would say.
Yeah. Did you want to add anything, Ali?
Thank you. I spent 31 years of my life in public services as a plant breeder. And what I believe, based on that experience, more regulations, more rules, it means more problems. I mean, if we put a lot of rules, to make it those rules, you spend so much money and you increase the price of the seeds. Between the countries, it should be noted, and the people outside the agriculture, sometimes they decide. Sometimes they are the policymakers, and they don't know the structure of the life or agriculture or seed business, and they make some stupid things, and they put us in difficult positions. So for that reason, I say less regulations, practical solutions, that makes it easy. And in our region, I mean in ECOSA region, luckily we don't have the, we don't know the presence of the WTO. The people, they don't know it. That is a lucky thing, or our advantage. Because in Turkey, maybe sometimes we think when we put the rules, what WTO will say. But if you go to the east and east, nobody care about the WTO. So it means we have to go for the most efficient transportation or movement of seeds, less regulations and practical ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to open up the floor to any questions from the audience. Is there anything that you'd like to ask our panelists about making lemonade out of lemons, unlocking investment and market opportunities? We have a question here.
Hello. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. And a big thank to all the panelists. I think you underlined very well some critical things. First of all, that the seed in... Sorry, I should have introduced myself. Philippe Lesigne from Bayer, and I am the chair of the Market Access and Trade Coordination Group for ICEF. Sorry that. So, yeah, it's clear the seed industry is global by essence, and not only because for historical reason there was some know-how developed in this part of the world or that part of the world for this type of crops, etc. It's also because we are dealing with living organism and the environment and the changing environment with the climate change impact is something that matters a lot finally to secure the quality of the seeds finally produced. So just as an example, in Europe, it's not by chance that there is a high concentration in the Nordics country of all the production of spinach seeds. Okay, it's a very complex seeds to produce, and it's the best environment. So just as an example. So we are specializing the area for seed production in the world, and then we are distributing the seeds where needed. So movement of seeds is crucial. You highlighted that very well. You also mentioned, yes, all the challenges that we are facing and which are not increasing. Ali, you are completely right. So more and more regulation, more and more difficulties, and the last one on top of all the technical one that we are used to live with, which is the phytosanitary requirement, the seed certification requirement, the registration requirements. Now we have some economical parameters coming on top of that, which are linked to the tariff, etc. Would be what do you think that ICEF and the group that was created some years ago and that I was kindly asked to chair could do better interacting with international organizations today represented by you, Doaa, as WTO, or by a company who are, let's say, developing the technology of the next decades, like your company, Philippe, what we could do developing partnership, interacting with you to optimize the way we are addressing our points to the policy maker, because I completely agree with what I heard is that we should not wait for the policymaker to do the things. We have to explain who we are, what the problem we are facing, and why it's so critical, because any impact on the freedom to operate for the seed industry has some consequences on the freedom to operate for the production of food in the world. So, can you elaborate a bit on how you would see International Seed Federation and the organization that you represent there, not only yours, interacting better?
Thank you. Anyone want to take that on the role of ISF?
Let me react to some part of it. That's a very big question again, but you know, I think the one thing which we need to understand, and you know, we have to also understand that policymakers does have the responsibility to protect their own. Insofar, you know, that is why there is phytosanitary rules and regulations to protect a country against diseases and pests that does not occur in that country. That is important that we state that. Unfortunately, you know, that and other protectionism rules have resulted over years that people are also abusing some phytosanitary rules as trade barriers. So they will put up diseases that does occur in that particular country as a limitation for import of seed in that country, and the disease already occur in that country. So that is the kind of thing that we from ISF side are addressing, and you know, developing new pest lists to ensure that you know, only the pests, the diseases on the list that can actually be a threat to a country is on that list. So that would be one part of the discussion, to say how do we reduce these pest lists that diseases are not, or phytosanitary arrangements are not used as trade barriers. And I think there's, you know, sort of tariffs can be also seen as a protectionism, you know, saying that the seed that will be sold in this country will be produced in this country. And, you know, that, of course, also result in the farmers in that country denied the access to the varieties that they really need to optimize their production, denied the quality of seed that they need to optimize their production. And I think those discussions are, again, ongoing. And, you know, developing systems to ensure that the protection is there, but not unduly acting as trade barriers.
Yeah. Okay. Doaa?
I think, first of all, thank you very much for the question. I think the International Seed Federation does a great job interacting with the WTO, and I think your Secretary General, Michael Keller, is a very well-known figure in Geneva to the WTO community and to trade negotiators. And he has basically, on a number of occasions, explained how the seed sector works to trade diplomats and trade negotiators, how seeds are different from regular agricultural commodities because a seed crosses a border to continue to develop and not as a finished product. Seeds are unique in terms of agricultural commodities. So he's done a terrific job explaining how the seed industry is vital for food security, how seeds are, how global the industry, how important it is not to disrupt the supply chain. And we've just collaborated with the Seed Federation and Michael Keller on a study on illicit trade in food and food fraud, which includes a chapter written by him on illicit trade in seeds, with the objective of leveraging WTO rules to fight against illicit trade, agreements like the pre-shipment inspection agreement, the customs evaluation agreement, the trade facilitation agreement, all sorts of instruments that could help us prevent illegal trade in seeds before it happens. So I would say advocacy, which ISF is really good at already.
That makes a lot of sense. So, of course, it sounds like ISF has the role of, you know, facilitating communication both among its members, but also external relations, explaining the seed industry to policymakers, especially in times like this. Yeah.
One or two sentences. I am thinking in 1950s or 1960s up to now. I mean, we didn't have any Orabanki. This is a parasite in sunflower. It is all over Turkey, and all the seeds came with the phytosanitary certificate. And in all other crops or vegetables, the same. So we should question first. Phytosanitary system at the moment is efficient or not. We have to look at that one. If we don't see any benefit from the phytosanitary certificate, let's get out it. I mean, I see all the diseases in the US in Turkey. I see all the diseases in France in Turkey, or they see all the diseases in Turkey in their countries. So there must, I think it must be something wrong somewhere. We have to find that one first.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from our audience? Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Aslı. I'm with the Engine Delegate, the Youth Ambassadors. I would like to ask, because earlier we had a conversation, you guys had a conversation about the multilateral agreements versus more like regional approach. And I was wondering how realistic it is to achieve this multilateral cooperation where different stakeholders have different views on having fewer regulations and more localized solutions.
Maybe I can go on that one. Yeah, it's creating multilateral agreements is exceedingly complex. But and in order to do that, you have to create systems, a systems approach, developing ways and means in which you're going to produce. Like, for instance, if we talk about phytosanitary regulations, you have to produce the seed in a certain way. You have to use certain hygienic practices. And all of those procedures have to be taken up in a system which will make the policy makers of all of those countries comfortable. So until now, we've not been able to achieve that. Until now, it's still a bilateral system where a bilateral system between two countries will govern the imports, exports of seed into that. But we all hope that we'll be able to get to a multilateral agreement where multiple countries will agree on a systems approach, which will mean that the seed will move easier, faster, and more efficiently. Are we going to achieve it? I would like to believe so, but it's not going to happen next year. So it's still a little bit of a work in progress, but very much a work in progress. And as part of the systems approach, I can also mention that we have started. There's a couple of countries, 5 countries in total, which are participating. The NPPOs, the national phytosanitary people from those countries are participating, and we're working with Cucumber as a pilot project to see if we can achieve this with one group. And then we're going to move on to other similar, let's say, projects, but also different countries, include more countries. But for now, it's still work in progress. But I believe that it's possible.
Did you want to add something, Doaa?
I would say that in terms of international rules for agricultural trade, the international community has already done what many would have thought impossible, which is the creation of an international agreement on agricultural trade. The WTO Agreement on Agriculture, which was created in the Uruguay round in 1996, has allowed agricultural trade to rise exponentially since it was created. It opened markets, it reduced subsidies, it reduced tariffs, it improved export competition. What we would like to do is to have it go further, but I don't think that in having it go further we should despair because the pace is slow, since what we already achieved is Herculean, and we shouldn't forget about that. And I would also say one thing that doesn't get mentioned when we discuss rules for agricultural trade, which is that the only organization that discusses subsidies is the WTO. There are no free trade agreements between countries that address subsidies. They only address market access and tariffs. It is only in the WTO. They're very difficult. They're a very difficult topic because countries are very sensitive about the support they give their farmers. But we already made a lot of progress in the Uruguay round in cutting these subsidies and making them more fair. And I hope that we can make even more progress going forward.
Thank you, Doaa. Yeah, I think it's very important to acknowledge how far we've come as well. We are about out of time. I wondered if one of you would kind of like to say anything in closing, a kind of homework assignment for people here at ISF. What is something that people can take home with them to try to do in order to, make this very difficult environment a little bit better, whether it's within their own organizations or communicating externally the importance of open markets to the seed trade? Anyone?
I can venture an answer if you want, but it's also a semi-answer to Philippe's question before, because I was thinking on his question also, what is the recipe for innovation to come also in dealing with all these uncertainties? And at the end of the day, I think the answer is exactly in what Michael Keller said this morning, is one hand alone cannot clap. That, to me, fundamentally is what needs to happen if we want innovation, is to bring a lot of stakeholders together, to brainstorm new ideas, to adapt technologies to a specific scope, to combine things that were not previously combined. And that, at the end of the day, results in the creativity and the resilience that allows us to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and deal with a difficult situation.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm glad that we ended on a positive note then. Thank you for that, Philippe. Thank you very much to everyone for coming. I hope that this was an enlightening panel for you. I know it was for me. And let's enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you.